So we are here today to really kind of dig into DX, right? So digital experience, people talk about customer experience a lot. This is going to be about digital experience. I think there's a lot of talk about shiny objects in retail these days, and we're here to kind of deconstruct that and really kind of get into what makes people tick, what lights people up. So we've got a fantastic lineup today. Thank you so much to all of our speakers and presenters and panelists. It's very exciting to have all of you here, and we are thrilled to have a keynote speaker today, Phil Robb. So Phil is the president and co-founder of b8ta, a software-powered retailer designed to make physical retail accessible for product makers and exciting for consumers. In his role at b8ta, he oversees the day-to-day operations of the company. Previous to b8ta, Phil held executive roles at Nest, where he led the global channel marketing team. Prior to Nest, Phil spent 6 years at Nintendo during the height of the Wii phenomenon. In his role as director of retail marketing, he was responsible for bringing Nintendo's brand to life across retail with partners like Walmart, Target, Best Buy, and Amazon. In addition to his years of experience at Nest and Nintendo, Phil held various leadership roles in marketing at Gap Inc. Please help me welcome Phil.
Good. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. All right, never know how things are going to turn out for an 8 o'clock session, so I appreciate you coming out this morning. Let's see. All right. So, this morning what I want to do is talk to you a little bit about, I think the topic is meet your new client, the CMO. One of the things I want to talk about today is really focusing on how I think there's been this kind of material shift in retail that you're starting to see. In that, at one time retail was solely looked at as a place where, the old kind of adage, stack them high, let them fly mentality. But the problem is that I think what the definition of retail, what the definition of a shopper is changing so much in that the retail setting and the forum is really starting to change a lot. Then it's not necessarily purely just a sales channel, but it's also just as much about awareness as it is about sales. And I'm going to kind of walk you through that journey a little bit. So what I want to first kind of start off by doing is walking you through a little bit and giving you a little bit of insights as to b8ta so you understand the context of where I'm coming from and then kind of where this journey is going. So before I kind of go into that, can I just has anybody heard of b8ta before the presentation today? Okay, so there's a couple of you. Before I do this, there's one question I always kind of like to ask the room. How many of you have ever made a purchase in a physical retail store? I would assume all hands, and if you're not, that means you're not paying attention. How many of you ever made a purchase online? How many of you have made a purchase online while standing in a physical retail store? Okay. So now you kind of start to understand and kind of think a little bit, you kind of see maybe kind of where I'm going with this is that the lines start to really get blurred. And I think for b8ta, at b8ta, our vision and our, when we started the company, it was that we wanted to create kind of a software-powered retail that was really designed with the physical maker in mind. Because very often what happens is, if you look at kind of traditional retail today, it's very much focused kind of on a wholesale mentality, very transactional, and not really kind of taking into consideration both the consumer as well as kind of the maker experience. That's what we wanted to do, is we wanted to create an experience which really empowered the maker to be able to have kind of more of a retail as a service model. So this is an example of our store in Silicon Valley. So this is just in Santana Row, just outside of San Jose. And so you can see kind of the dynamic of the store in that, everything there's a digital signage next to each product. Each product is out of box. It really allows the consumer to go in and experience each product on its own. And one of the things that we're doing at the same time is that anytime that a customer walks up to look at a product, we're measuring and tracking the experience of the consumer throughout the customer journey. So for example, what you can see here is that there's these custom-made displays, and each one of those products has a couple of things that's built into that. There's ways that we can track from above using technology from Retail Next, where you can watch and see what's going on with each individual as they're going from product to product. Really understanding kind of the journey. So what happens is if you walk and stop, if you walk by a product, it's tracking an impression. If you stop and look at a product, it's looking at the engagement. So if you're standing there for more than 5 seconds, it can start to track dwell times. And then we also have technology built into there that if a beta tester or a retail associate comes by and starts to engage with you, we can track if you're actually demoing that product, as well as starting to measure any sort of both qualitative and quantitative feedback. So anything that happens through that journey and through that experience, one of our beta testers can go on to the displays and go in and input things like, can take a small kind of questionnaire and survey after that point. So you can start to see just the dynamic. These are a couple more pictures. This is our store in Seattle of all the different dynamics. For example, one of the other unique things about our business model is that we actually don't monetize and make any money off of the sale of goods. It's all about placement. So for example, the trash can that you see right there, that's actually a product that's for sale. It's not just a trash can, although people do use it to try to use it as a trash can. But for example, that company, Simple Human, is paying for that space because, again, people are engaging with the product, and there's a display right next to it that talks about all the features and benefits of that product. One of the other things that we've done at Beta is we've also are working very closely with Lowe's, where we're integrating our technology, our business model, and bringing that into the smart home space and we're doing and operating today in 70 Lowe's locations. So now you have a little bit of a kind of understanding and a flavor of kind of Beta and kind of who we are and some of the things that we're doing in kind of this retail as a service model. What I want to do is walk you through a little bit about kind of, I think, the retail landscape and some of the things that we're seeing today. So if you open up any sort of news feed today, you're on social media, these are the type of headlines you're going to see, right? I mean, Best Buy just announced that they're closing all their mobile stores. I think we all know about the Toys R Us closures, but anywhere you look. So these are literally kind of ripped from the headlines probably within the last 30 days of all of these, continuing to see store closures, this kind of whole apocalyptic type of theme that you're kind of seeing and hearing throughout retail. Now, why is that happening? Well, one of the problems and one of the reasons it's happening is that ultimately retail is really, I think, failing the product maker. And what I mean by that, in that they're failing the maker, is that they're really, the whole idea, again, is that traditional retailers have always thought of themselves as either being an online retailer or an offline retailer. The problem is that we as consumers don't think like that. Just as I asked you the question as to who's shopped in a store, who's shopped online, and who's shopped has bought something through an e-commerce platform while standing in a store, it's because we don't think like that as consumers. We think about commerce. We think about how are we going to transact, how are we going to buy something, and where is it going to show up? Is it going to show up in my office? Is it going to show up at my front doorstep? Can I actually have it delivered to me while I'm sitting at a coffee shop in a corner? These are all things that we want. We want convenience. We crave it, and this is what's happening. But the problem is that the modern day retailer isn't necessarily thinking about that. They're still thinking in having kind of these two kind of bifurcated channels in which they're working off of. So if you start to think about it, then what's ended up happening is that there's a lot of new brands that are starting to come to the fold. So with the internet, it's really changed the way that brands have been able to launch. And I'm going to talk about that in a second. But one of the things is that you're seeing this new kind of emergence of kind of direct-to-consumer brands that have grown up online in its kind of early infancy because it's been very easy for them to get, once they've created a product or once they even are working with other companies and bringing other brands to life, it's very simple. But the problem is they've really fought hard of going into physical retail. And you ask the question, why? Well, you know what? There's a lot of reasons. One, they just don't really find that the retail offerings out there today are very exciting. So all of a sudden, I've got this cool new hip brand that I've created. Consumers are engaging with it online. I've done a lot of Facebook ads, retargeting, Instagram postings. I've got these huge followings as a brand. And then all of a sudden, you're going to ask me to go into a traditional big box retailer and put it on a shelf where it's kind of lifeless. The associate is maybe making a minimum wage, doesn't necessarily know how to talk about my product, isn't really engaged with it. So you have this kind of lack of engagement that doesn't have that passion and enthusiasm for brands in the same way that maybe the consumers do when you can reach out to them online. The lead times in order to get a product getting into retail today are still very arduous. It can take anywhere from 6 to 12 months to get a product on shelf from the time that you talk to a buyer. It's just laden with hidden cost, right? So if you look at it, it's not just selling a product in at a particular margin. All of a sudden, they're asking for trade dollars. Then you have to go in and hire potentially a merchandising team to ensure that your product's actually on shelf. There's just a lot of things I think that a lot of times very young brands aren't aware of when they kind of get into physical retail. And as they have advisors that are telling them, hey, you might want to steer clear of this because it can be a lot more expensive than you think. It's not just as the glamorous idea of just getting a PO cut. And then lastly, and the biggest thing I think that's the problem today for most companies as they start to kind of emerge and come looking into come into the retail space, is there's no access to data, right? So a company that maybe grew up online has all of this data that they can ascertain through their web portals, but when you all of a sudden your product is on shelf, it becomes a black box and you have no idea of what's happening with your product other than maybe getting a daily or weekly sales report. So as I said, then the kind of the de facto way that brands now bring their products to market, traditionally it was, if you had a product and you wanted to be successful, you would go out to all the big box retailers, right? So if you were a mass product, you wanted to, the idea of getting a meeting down in Bentonville and being able to potentially have your products in Walmart was the end all be all, right? That's what was going to kind of signify success if you got distribution within Walmart or Target. Same thing, for CE product into Best Buy. But a lot of, like I said, brands are really saying, you know what? That's not for us. Our investors are even telling us we don't even want to go that route at first. Eventually, maybe we'll get there. So e-commerce is the simplest way to kind of go for most of these brands. And if you look at the Shopify effect, right? If you look at what Shopify has done and how easy it's made bringing a product to market, if you look at it now, as of I was looking at these numbers, and this is kind of as of today. Now, Shopify, this is the most recent numbers from their website. They have over 600,000 businesses transacting in 175 countries throughout the world. That's pretty fascinating when you think about it, like how many people are actively using and shopping through e-commerce platforms that are powered by Shopify. So now, if you think about this, so again, if this is the portal to doing it, you think, okay, well. All brands are then kind of making this kind of transformation to e-commerce, right? And then as we look back earlier, all these stores are shutting down, so physical retail must be dead. It's just kind of time to move on. It's kind of time to shift, for businesses to shift all their resources into an online platform. Absolutely not. It's the furthest thing from the truth. What you see is this kind of whole apocalyptic sense of what's going on in the marketplace, but what really, because if you think about it, the media just loves to sensationalize anytime that there's anything negative that's happening in the industry and focus on that, rather than focusing on the positive. And the positive is that there's so many new brands that are emerging that are actually starting to go into the physical space. These are all brands that traditionally grew up online. If you look at it, walk into, Casper has launched 15 stores. There's one in San Francisco, and my in-laws were just in there this weekend, and they were raving about it. Now they're going to go out and buy, upgrade their Casper mattress. So this is, again, how they're talking to, definitely new consumers, reaching out. Again, another example of Glossier in San Francisco. Right now, you can't go anywhere without seeing, it's just, they've blanketed the entire city with outdoor, out-of-home advertising, and it's everywhere because they're getting ready to open up, one of their first, new stores. So there's so many of these brands, and Warby is probably kind of the most prime example of a company who started as an online business, and I think this year will have over 70, outlets. So what you're starting to see is this shift. Now, why is this shift happening? It's because these brands still recognize that still 8 out of 10 people still prefer to shop in store. Now, when I say shop, what do I mean by shop? Again, it goes back to why I asked you the question earlier. Shopping has a purely kind of new definition. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're physically transacting and you're walking out of the store with the product. The new definition really of shopping is that, it's that distinction. You may be going in there and you may be browsing, you may be looking at things, you may be doing education, you're learning about products. In our stores, one of the things that we track is we have the ability to track anytime that a purchase is made, we ask customers if they'd ever heard about the product before. And we find that in our stores, now our stores do focus primarily on new and emerging kind of technology and new products that are coming to market, but we carry a lot of household brands, from Google to Sonos, to Logitech, Dyson, a lot of different, like I said, very kind of household names within kind of connected home and the CE space. And what we find, though, is that about a little over 70%, it's almost creeping up to about 75% of customers who make a purchase in our stores, whether they be in our flagship locations or in Lowe's, have learned about that product for the very first time when they purchase. Now, it doesn't mean that they learned about that brand. Yes, they may have heard of LG, maybe they've heard of Dyson, maybe they've heard of Sonos or Google, obviously. But what they didn't know is they didn't necessarily know about that particular SKU or the product features that existed. So they're going in and learning about something. So they maybe have some idea or some sense of it, but they didn't necessarily know about that particular item, which is very fascinating in the sense is that, again, it goes back to the fact that you're learning and experiencing about a product for the very first time. And I think that's kind of a traditional shift in the mindset, right? Because we've always think about advertising in TV, or even now think about kind of digital advertising as being the way to reach consumers, when really it still is probably the most old-fashioned way. It's actually physically seeing and hearing about these products. So this is why you're starting to see this emergence of, and the importance of why digitally native brands now realize why they need the physical space. So this is something that I was reading from one of the, I believe, one of the investors at Lightspeed who invested in Bonobos. And there was an article, and again, it goes back to how shoppers think about, again, this idea that you need to understand that it's not necessarily purely about online channel or an offline channel, but how it's really kind of this kind of, I would say, emergence between the two. And this is a great, I think, statistic. So this is from about Bonobo. So the customer who buys first in store is likely to spend 2 times more and half the return rate. And then they're going to spend more down the road online. So all of a sudden, again, what they're doing is, if you think about it, the store is truly an investment into kind of that long tail customer acquisition, right? You want to get that customer into the funnel because they're going to come back to your stores, they're going to come back to your online experiences. It's getting them into the ecosystem of your product and your brand. And that's what's using the physical world to kind of draw them in, because you can no longer necessarily do that purely in a digital realm. So, now that you think about it, okay, so you as a brand, you've kind of conquered kind of e-commerce, you've launched now into your retail stores, kind of what's next? What's next on the horizon? So, as I mentioned, I think brands realize that they have to have this kind of holistic solution to retail. And they need to be thinking in terms of it too. So you're even starting to see that internally, if you look at organizational structures within retail, they're starting to kind of break down the barriers, right? I mean, when I was at Gap, it was you had the brand side, and then you literally had kind of a whole other division that ran kind of the digital experience. And there was very little integration. It was created as kind of almost its own entity in of itself. But you're starting to see, I think, a lot more integration within companies and figuring out how they can kind of really break down those barriers and understand that it's not, they shouldn't be operating in silos. So, as I mentioned, brands want that kind of fully integrated kind of solution as well when they're working with their retail partners. So again, it's not just about kind of what you're on, you've got maybe an online solution, there's a wholesale solution, and there's retail solutions. And so what's that convergence? How do they come together? So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna show you a couple of examples of some of the things that we've seen in some of the programs that we've seen at Beta, and how brands and we're working with brands, and how brands are working with us to kind of create some of those integrations. So just I think for, and I know I've talked about a lot about merchants and breaking down the barriers between online and offline, but I'm going to use it just, I think, just to kind of, so you can kind of get a sense of how this, different ways kind of this works. So this is what kind of saying, kind of bridging that kind of online to kind of offline experience. So what we found is there's a product, it's called Onewheel. So any of you that maybe live in kind of urban areas, you may see these things kind of whipping down the street. I have no idea, honestly. I bust my ass every time I get on one of these things, and no idea how most people kind of ride them, especially as they're weaving in and out of traffic. But here was a product where, at first, when Onewheel, they came in into beta, they weren't necessarily seeing the results that they'd kind of had anticipated. And like I said, we're not necessarily a true kind of sales platform. But the idea is, they didn't feel like they were seeing really any ROI or any kind of benefit. But what they then realized is that many people were going onto their site and were really craving, again, because as you can see, this is a little bit of a unique kind of mode of transportation, a unique apparatus. People were intrigued by it. People had heard about it. They'd seen a lot of online ads or maybe people talking about it, but they really didn't know how the product was working. So what Onewheel started to do is that they put a store locator where they would literally be funneling traffic. And then all of a sudden, as they started funneling traffic to our stores, because we had the place where customers could come in, and especially in the LA area where they're based, people would come into our store in Santa Monica and try it, and all of a sudden, we saw this huge spike in sales because, again, there was a place and a destination. So they were using their online vehicle and channels, setting it up so that they were driving traffic into our stores. In a similar kind of sense, this is another company. It's called Rad Power Bikes. These guys are headquartered out of Seattle. It was almost the opposite. They knew they had a great product, but what they wanted to do is provide showrooms. And so people would come in, and then what would happen is we would get people that would come in, see the product, be excited about the product, but instead of being able to purchase it in store, we would then kind of funnel that back to them and go to their website, because what they wanted to do is they wanted to be able to assemble the bikes for people. They would send out like a technician, get a hands-on experience, walk them through how to use the bikes, how to walk through because this is an e-bike, the whole experience. So again, this was using and utilizing all the traffic that were coming into our stores, and then creating, again, this kind of engaging tool where all of a sudden the consumer now had a direct relationship with the maker. And then lastly, here's another kind of example we kind of talked about with integrations that is that company LifeX, so they make kind of smart lighting solutions. So every year we run a program called 8 Days of Beta. So for 8 days, we market everything, and everything is at 20% off. So this is something that we self-fund as an organization. So LifeX understood this, and they knew this, and so what they did was they basically went into their database. And they know that if you own one light bulb, that there's kind of a propensity that you're gonna buy additional bulbs throughout the home, especially if you like their product. So rather, since they knew that we were funding this, and they saw an opportunity to capitalize on this, what they did was they sent out to all of their email subscribers to, rather than going to the LifeX homepage and to purchasing something, they actually sent out to all their subscribers and push the traffic to us, because they knew that at the end of the day that it was going to be, they were going to save themselves money, but at the same time they also knew that they could sell a lot more light bulbs. And in doing so, it actually crashed our site. It was the day, it was the first, so we launched our e-commerce platform this past year in August, and when we did it, it was on for this promotion, and we literally that morning crashed because there were so many inquiries coming in. We had people engaging with our brand from states, you know, I think we had like something like 47 states represented on that day. And you know, here's a company that at the time I think we had 4 locations, maybe 5 locations, you know, and primarily, you know, on the West Coast. So that was a really, really big thing. But again, it just shows you how, as brands, you can start to kind of cross-pollinate. So we now know, right? So the consumers are starting to interact with products, as we talked about, kind of in different ways. They're coming into physical retail, but still kind of the one piece that is kind of left outstanding is we don't know what's happening with products in retail, right? So we talked about some of these online promotions and things of that nature, but you can track that. You know exactly, you know, especially if your customer subscribes, if your customer is purchasing, you have all of that data. And that's the beauty of kind of the internet and the online purchases. You know exactly who your customer is. You have a lot of demographic information, but we're very anonymous when it comes to kind of the physical space. So this is where I think today, and seeing technology and kind of really kind of proving itself out in much different ways, I think, than it ever has before. So I think there's 6 ways that we really kind of view it. 3 of those things I want to focus in on the right-hand side here. I will kind of briefly mention just, you know, some of the other things where technology can improve kind of the physical retail experience. Through software and technology, you can get faster access. So one of the things we do at Beta is that we actually allow brands to go onto our site and sign up. So gone are the days of reaching out to a buyer, going through the whole process of line reviews and things of that nature. Literally, you can, if we have space available in one of our stores, you can send your product to us as long as you meet kind of a certain kind of baseline criteria, and we'll start selling your product in our stores. Again, you can pick out placements, whether, you know, you can pick the locations, which markets you want to go into. You can work with us in picking out the locations actually in the store through our portal. And so these are, again, ways that through technology of doing things that you can never do, I think, in the past. But what I want to focus in is more on the consumer side and some of the data aspects of things, especially as it's relevant, I think, to a lot of the things that are happening kind of with digital signage and the focus of the conference here this week. So as I mentioned earlier, we have the ability to look at both qualitative and quantitative data. Through our signage, the customized digital displays, there's a lot of different things that we can do around education, around pricing. Again, giving control back to the makers, where the makers have that control through their signage, and then they can access remotely anywhere in the world. We work with partners in different continents, who, different time zones, or who literally can control things and have visibility to what's happening in their stores pretty much 24/7. And then also how technology kind of plays into product training with sales staff. So I'm going to kind of take a deep dive into each one. So if you look at kind of from an analytics platform standpoint, one of the things that from digital displays, in the same way today that you could go into whether it's your own site, whether it's maybe managing it through a retailer site like Amazon, and being able to kind of control those marketplace factors, those are things today that the technology allows for in signage, especially if you can kind of create portals. And so one of the things is that what we allow brands, and we're also seeing other companies starting to do, is going in and being able to change that marketing message. So if you have a consumer who's in store, maybe you're rolling out a new product, maybe there's 2 different taglines you want to check, maybe there's 2 different product features you want to look at, because you're kind of on the fence. Now you have the ability to go in and do that to understand what's resonating more. Similarly, because of our business model, because we don't make money, we don't own the product, actually the maker is the one still that owns the product, they can go in And no longer do you have all of these issues of, kind of footballing price and all the issues that everyone gets frustrated with that's happening, this kind of price denigration potentially. You can go in, you can even set your own prices, you can lock them in, you can A/B test them, you can do flash sales, all things that you could potentially do online, now you can do in the kind of physical space. In fact, you can even get to the point where if you understand maybe somebody standing at your display for 30 seconds or maybe longer, maybe if you wanted to change the price, maybe if they're kind of going through, eventually through facial recognition, if somebody comes back to your product, you can start to say, well, wow, I've noticed that, okay, that same profile person has come back, we're gonna change the price on that product. So all things that you can kind of start to look at through kind of an analytics and a digital platforms that you were never able to do before. Next is the data. And again, it's about capturing that level of data. It's building out the tools and the resources through having these platforms. So for example, the way that we operate is that, like I had mentioned, we work with a company called Retail Next, and they make the cameras and the hardware that go into our stores. But what we've done is we've built over their API that allows us to go in and kind of customize this for our makers and our partners. So now all of a sudden you can start to see all of this different level of engagement data. So I talked about earlier, you have the marketing impressions, awareness data, but then all of a sudden you can start to then ask more formulated questions and start to get kind of deeper. And I'm going to talk about a little bit more around kind of the training aspect and how we're utilizing this with our sales staff in ways that you can kind of understand and think about in that in-store technology, empowering decision making, but at the same time capturing this level of information. So I think it's very critical as you start to kind of understand, as you can start now to kind of get this correlation. And one of the things that we're also able to do is to start benchmarking. And we found that it's very powerful is that when you can start to take be very similar categories of products or actually maybe even competitive products, as long as it's anonymized, you can start to go in and start to see, well, how am I performing? Why is the engagement level so much higher for that product than my product? And maybe even understand, maybe my product is actually outselling theirs, but I have lower engagement data, or the dwell times on mine are lower because maybe your marketing message is so crisp and clear that everyone gets it, whereas maybe a competitive product, it isn't. Or maybe, and in vice versa, you could be looking at it and going, well, my engagement data is really high. People spend a long time with my product, but they're really not purchasing it. And maybe it goes back to the reason they're spending a lot of time with it because they're confused by it. They just don't understand. So they're reading more, they're having to look at it more, but they really are they're kind of dumbfounded about it. Same type of thing. We track, like I said, kind of actually physical demos and things that are happening. So I think through this, there's ways to start, cobbling all of this data together and telling a much bigger story as it exists in the physical environment. And then lastly, I think this is something that is probably so overlooked, is the staffing component. Traditionally what would happen is you saw this, the first place that retailers cut cost is on labor. It's the easiest place to cut labor, to cut cost, right? You go through, but at the same time, it's probably the most frustrating thing as a consumer. You walk into a store and you can't find everyone, and you can't find anyone. Now, there's this kind of fine line, right? I think we as consumers don't always want to necessarily be bothered and hounded by staff, but think about all the times when you've had amazing customer experience. It's because you actually had a staff who wasn't in there necessarily trying to pitch you on something. They were actually being a guide. And one of the, my focuses and the way that we work with our team is I always tell people, you need to think about, you're inviting somebody in your home. So the products and the things we have, it's like, hosting a cocktail party and you want to go in and show off, all the cool kind of things that maybe you have, maybe something new that you purchased. It's a very more of a kind of friendly, inviting experience rather than it's kind of this hard sales pitch. And I think sometimes that's kind of what's very standoffish. But if you look at kind of the way that some of these new retailers, so if you were to walk into a Tesla showroom, you're not going to get hounded. They're not going to necessarily try to pitch you on a $150,000 car. It's really because, again, it's around education, allows you to go in and browse, but you have somebody who's there and that guide. And I think that's where I think the staff can start to kind of come in when you have a highly trained staff, a staff that is engaging. So there's two things that that allows for. One is that staff member can also start to ascertain a lot of data because they're asking you questions. So for example, what we do is like, we'll ask, we weave it into the conversation. It could be something to the effect of, oh, have you ever heard of these products? Oh, is this your first time into the store today? Okay. Have you ever heard of these products before? I see you're looking at this product. Are you aware of this product before? Have you ever, oh, you are. You know about this, you know about this brand new feature, this and that. So it's really kind of in the subtle ways of then understanding. And then what happens is on one of the displays, that individual would go back and log in and say, consumer had never heard of this product, or yes, had heard of the product, had never heard of these product features. And then all of a sudden, so you're starting to get very tangible qualitative data and feedback. In the same way, what happens is a maker can go and reach out either through kind of our handheld devices that each staff member has, ask them questions. So we use Slack as a communication tool where I can, in real time, I know everything that's happening in every one of my stores. Right now, I can go out and reach, and I have if a promotion is being run by one of our maker partners, I get a notification. That's everyone in the store gets that notification. At the same time, if that maker has a question or wants something answered and wants to know more about their product, they can ping the team and they'll get that. And throughout the day, then you're working on trying to find those kind of questions. So again, it's whether it be through this technology or whether it even be through the displays. All of a sudden, there's this whole nother level of engagement that's starting to happen. But you can't do that unless if you have a highly trained staff, a staff that really embraces and is passionate about what they're doing. And this is where I think the labor model comes back. But again, it's not purely a sales team, a sales member. It is a much bigger kind of, I would say, they're opening up kind of, I think, a horizon, I think, in ways that I think people have never really thought about how to do that. And that's why I think we really can kind of elevate it. And that's why I think staffing is so kind of important. And then the last thing is that through the digital signage, also you can continue to learn and educate because again, everything's in front of you, whether it's videos on the product, whether it's bullet points on product. So you as the maker can upload everything. So you're not only educating the consumer, you're also educating the staff members who can learn more about the products, especially if you're adding new features. So with that, kind of wraps up, I think the last thing I wanted to just kind of close with is that, again, we need to start thinking and you need to start thinking differently, that the retail space really is no longer purely just about a sales channel. It's no longer about transacting in that moment. It's about sales, it's about marketing, it's about discovery. And this is where customers are going in, whether you're out on, especially as if you look at the way that malls and lifestyle centers are being developed today, it's about, look at the amount of food and beverage that are now and entertainment that's being integrated into most lifestyle centers and malls today, right? It's about an experience. So if you're going out on a Thursday or Friday night and you're out and about and you walk into a store, you may not really be in the mindset to purchase something at that moment, right? Maybe you just had dinner, maybe you're going out with some friends still later in the evening. You don't want to walk out with maybe some cumbersome bag or something purchased, but you're engaged with that product, you're intrigued by that product. Maybe you're going to go home and purchase it. Maybe you're actually going to, like I said earlier, you're going to purchase it while you're standing in the store. Maybe you just want it shipped to your home. Maybe you want it delivered. So the means of commerce are changing, and so is the retail and the physical space, and that's why we have to start thinking differently in that, it's about talking to the CMO, it's about talking to and understanding the language of the marketer, because the whole physical retail space through technology and software is transforming. So, thank you very much. I think we maybe have like 5 minutes if there's any questions. Or, okay, yeah. Okay. So we have 9 flagship locations. We're in Seattle, 4 in the Bay Area, Santa Monica, Austin, Houston, New York, and we'll be announcing in a couple weeks, we'll be announcing a couple of new markets we'll be entering into. So just be aware when you It is actually, oddly enough, it is an impulse purchase. And so you're sitting there going like $4,500 impulse purchase. Like it's not a pack of gum, right, at Walgreens. But what happens is that we have a lot of affluent individuals that will walk into the store, and because it is so unique and it's such a like piece, they're like, I have to have it because they've never seen anything like it before. That we literally will have people come in, and we're the only. There is one other, I think, physical location, but for a while we were the only retailer in the United States that actually even carried the product. So people would come in and be like, "Wow, this is beautiful. It's a piece of art." I want to say we sold like something like 15 of them in the month of December alone. And that was just in our stores, and we even had more online, because what ends up happening is that going back between that kind of interface between online and offline, it's a Japanese company, and if you go on and click onto the US icon on their website, it literally takes you to beta.com. So.
If there's any questions, we'll field them, and then Phil will repeat the questions.
Yes.
Yeah, Paul, when you covered the online, offline section in the case study,
Yep.
you talked about what was called RadBike
Yes.
out of Seattle.
Yeah, correct.
So that put customers into a retail environment to demo and then just like see the bike and functional features and benefits, but then to either place orders there at the store or online, and then you mentioned that the result was a higher level of purchase after that experience, shifting to the online.
Yeah, so I think the question was asking about kind of the example that I had given on some of the case studies regarding RadBike. So we, in all of our locations, we carry various different models of rad bikes. So one of the things that we've been able to do is we actually have very high level of traffic and engagement in our stores. So we have high level of traffic and engagement. So people will come in, learn about the product, and then what happens is Rad wants to use it as a showroom where people can come in, but then they want to kind of own the customer. So we don't carry inventory on that product. We carry inventory on probably about 90% of the products we carry. But they'll come in, check out the product. So either that traffic could be driven because Rad sent them to one of our stores as their showroom, or it could just be somebody's learning about it. It's a $2,500 bike, so it's probably not going to be something that maybe somebody walks out with that day. They're going to want to do some more homework on it. Once they maybe can come in, they can try the bike. We can let them you can take it for a test ride. You can take the bike out, give it a spin. And then what happens is then Rad wants to own that. So they'll come, if they want to make either a purchase in store, we can help them transact through their web portal, or they can go home and do that. And then Rad will send somebody out, a technician. They can help them, walk them through kind of the assembly process, talk about everything that they need to do and educate them. And so that's how they're using our stores.
Once that was in place, what was the incremental uplift in purchases once the product was in beta, and then of course they had the option to purchase?
I don't have those sales lifts. That's how they've been actually working with us from day one. They kind of understood that and really kind of got that, which I think was great for us and for them. I can tell you that we do see considerable amount of traffic that we deliver to them on a per monthly basis, and they see a positive ROI of it. Yes. Yeah. We do a lot of that, understanding kind of traffic patterns, how people navigate through the store. One of the early findings that we had when we first opened our Palo Alto store, look, when I originally designed the store, we had, I think, 47 products, of which probably maybe only like 30 of them were you could even purchase. Were even in production at the time. We had a lot of prototypes. But what we did was we set it up in kind of almost this kind of museum-like fashion. And we were intrigued by two things. One is that everyone was fighting to be at the front of store, but what ended up happening is that like most people, because the store was so inviting, that it actually pushed traffic to the back, that like being in front of store, most people just blew right past the products. So typically it was like, oh, you wanted to be front and center. That really wasn't actually the best place to be. And two was that we found that because of having this very like low sight lines, having all the product accessible, and making it very easy, is that we would see patterns where people literally would go space by space by space. And the dwell times and the average time that somebody was spending in our stores was like 3 times the industry average. So not only were, on average, people look at each product in our stores about 24 seconds. The industry average is somewhere around like 7 to 8 seconds that people will stop and look at something. So we were having a very high level of engagement because, again, the displays, the products were there. Everything was, you had that kind of tactile experience. And then as people would move through, we were also noticing that their dwell times just staying in store, we were seeing that they were engaging with about 50% of the products. And we were finding that people were spending about anywhere from half an hour to 40 minutes, which is kind of unheard of in one box. And then we were also could monitor kind of traffic and where they were going and adjacencies. And those are things that we still actually work on today. Every month we change out the store. We add about 10 to 15 new products monthly. Because that's the whole idea, is it's constantly about refreshing and newness within the store. And then we also shift where the products are based off of that data that we have. Thank you. Yeah. We don't use a lot of off-the-shelf tools, to be honest with you. We have about a third of our company is either kind of UX or engineers. So we do build a lot of our tools. Our DNA is very. We were all at Nest, and a lot of us, previous, and I'm not sure if those are aware of Nest, but Nest was founded. 70% of the company was. Early days were all ex-Apple engineers and employees, so kind of very much that Apple DNA where you bring everything in-house and you do it yourself and you really own kind of the whole funnel. So that was kind of really how we think about everything and we process it. So we build a lot of those tools for ourselves. We do, where we think that there's technology that exists, we're not going to go out and kind of recreate. We use those off-the-shelf tools. So I'd say Slack and Retail Next are probably outside of things like NetSuite and kind of other CRM tools. But we build a lot of we've built all of our dashboards internally. But again, it's still having that component where you have that flow. So for example, the onboarding flow with our maker partners and kind of everything from that to the data that they receive is all things that we've built in-house. Yes.
Aside from a maker paying a price admission fee,
Yep.
what are the other guidelines you have for curating what makes it in store?
Yeah, we get the question a lot about curation. And to be honest with you, we went back and forth whether we should curate products or not. Ultimately, we felt like the physical world could act as a marketplace. And so we do very little curation. And the idea is if you use software and technology and allow products to come in, the consumer's ultimately going to make the decision of whether something should be there or not. So in our contracts, in our agreements, while we'll sign long-term contracts, there is the ability, if the product just isn't performing, and the company's not seeing the results, we're not going to keep charging a company to be in our stores. And similarly, we don't want the product there. But we do want the ability to bring it in, because if we acted as buyers, I can tell you right now, like almost all of our top-selling products or products that have the highest level of engagement, I probably would have said there's no way that people are going to purchase or engage with this product, because I would have been dead wrong. So again, taking that out of, using the data to let the consumer and their engagement in sales ultimately dictate whether it's a product that we keep. And so what we'll do is by having that, And having a system and having the product set up the way we are, we can quickly bring products in and out. Now, obviously, as we grow, there becomes more process and scale behind that. We're having to sometimes, I think, make a little bit more of kind of a choice, maybe more so than we were doing in the early days. But still, most of it is very data-driven, and we do very little curation. Like I said, it has to meet some sort of kind of certain criteria. But at the same time, if we had a product where it was a battery-powered like charger, and we were finding, we were seeing return rates of like something like 70, 80%. We pulled the product like that because it was a safety issue for us. So again, by having that, it was off the shelf within hours, and that's where we believe though. But again, there's so many new products coming to market. We want to give products and makers an opportunity to have that platform in that marketplace where their products can be discovered. Yeah, so as you see, each product, go back. So you can see down here, every product has a display next to it. So originally we used iPads for our first gen. We've gone in and the team has built these. So these are proprietary. We own the patents on them. We've gone and built these in-house, again, which has like a lot. It powers everything that we do. So it has the ability, it has built-in cameras, it has the ability, it's all web-based, so we can upload everything, and makers, when they go into their portals, they can upload everything from anywhere, from their phones, from their computers, anywhere in the world. We do. Yeah. It's not turned on today, though. Yep, thank you.